So I would love to just really briefly introduce Paul. He might introduce himself as well, but just to get the ball rolling, Paul is the director of community programs at the El Sable Institute, which is based in Mansalona, Michigan area, just outside of Traverse City. Absolutely beautiful area. And he works with and engages folks in the local community, houses of worship, but also local schools um, through their Sacred Grounds program, working with houses of worship, and then their restoration ecology for young students program. And he will, I'm sure, tell you a little bit more about those, but especially the Sacred Grounds program, which involves working with houses of worship on native plant gardens, which is why we were so excited to have him come and speak with us all. So, with that, I will hand things over to Paul, and we will have time for questions towards the end of his presentation. So definitely be prepared and come with lots of questions at that time.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, happy to be here. I see some familiar faces on here too, so that's always great. It's a small community, but a mighty community. I think that Arasha and Asable partner to serve, and it's great to be here tonight to talk about how to engage houses of worship in native plant gardening and kind of what are the steps to developing native plant garden on your property or within your community, and looking at really the practical application and steps to working from the ground up to complete a project of that sorts. So I'll go ahead and do a screen share here because we've got some slides we want to share with you all, and I'll tell you too a little bit about Asable. So here we go. Everybody got that? Perfect. Let me get a pointer on here, and then we're good. Yeah, so my name is Paul Wiemerslage. I direct the Sable's community programs. The Sable's mission is to inspire and educate people to serve, protect, and restore God's earth. We do this through a number of different programs. Probably our largest maybe our largest revenue source is actually acting as a field station for about 50 universities, Christian colleges across North America. Small private universities that don't have large environmental departments will send their students to us, and they take field-based courses from us throughout the summer. They can pick up 16 credits during the summer. We run programs in Northern Michigan. We run programs out on Whidbey Island in Washington State. We even have programs in Costa Rica, so we're built into their catalogs. And our mission is to inspire and educate people to serve, protect, and restore God's earth. We do that through that college program. And then my job and the interns in the church and community conservation internships job is to bring Asable's mission out into the community around us. And as Brittany was saying, one of the main ways we do that is through restoration work. So we have two programs primarily that work with community groups to install native plants on properties or at schools or at houses of worship, or just helping to aid restoration work in the watersheds around us. The first is our Sacred Grounds program, and that's a partnership with the National Wildlife Federation. And that works with houses of worship. So we meet with them, we take them through training and prep and installation of these gardens on their properties. And so that's what really we're going to be, that's dovetailing, I think, with the work that you guys are looking for tonight. But we also work with school groups on year-long programs that engage the students in project-oriented learning. So they adopt an area within their watershed that needs restoration care, and then we provide the education and the plants, and the students create a restoration project at the end of the year where they go out and plant all these plants to restore part of their home places. So that's me professionally. I suppose personally, I have two wonderful daughters. I've got a yellow lab named Beriga, and I've never played fantasy football, and I don't know how to sleep in a hammock comfortably. So I think my age, that's probably where I'm going to be with those things. So let's take a look at the agenda we got here for everybody tonight. I'd love to start, obviously, by, just laying some framework for why we would care for creation. Why has God asked us to care for this place? What does it mean and what does it look like? And then because we're focusing on native plant gardens, I'd love to be able to talk to you all about why native plants are important. Why is there a big buzz around them? And why does it make sense for us to install these at our houses of worship and care about them in our home places? We're going to go over some different types of gardens that you might consider. So there's more than just planting flowers that look pretty. There's some useful applications for native plant gardens as well. And then the bulk of what we're going to spend our time on is really the process. So what does it look like to install a native plant garden? What goes into it? What things should I be thinking about? So if the barrier for you is right now, that seems like it's way too much work, hopefully this will be able to kind of chop it up into bite-sized pieces and makes it maybe a little bit more approachable for you. And for others who have a background, maybe this will highlight some special considerations that you might want to consider while you're going to engage your house of worship in this type of work. I'm not going to cover natural history on native plants tonight. This is a national kind of scope in a webinar, and native plants are particular to certain regions and places. And so I want to focus most of the energy on how can you go about instituting a garden at your site. I will say that if you're interested in plants, I'm sure that the cohort leaders around you can be put into touch with them, and they can put you into touch with resources. But universities, municipalities, local schools, those are all great places to get resources. And then obviously, if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer any of those. So either tonight or in the future, you can always use us as a resource as well. So I want to tell a story because I think we're probably all familiar with some of the biblical mandates that ask for us to care for creation, but there's a story that goes with some of these photos that are on here, and that starts with some professors who teach out at a Sable Institute. So we have two characters. Tim Van Deelen is a professor at the University of Wisconsin, and he's a wildlife ecology professor, and he's just a very wise man. But in this story, he kind of plays a little bit of a grumpy, kind of curmudgeon-y sort of guy. And then there's another guy, Dave Warners, who's a professor at Calvin University in Michigan here. And he's got this just like kind of gentle way about him. And these two guys are real best friends. And every night out at a Sable, just about every night, they can be seen going for a walk. And Dave Warners teaches our restoration ecology class. And so everywhere he goes, he picks out this plant. It's called spotted knapweed, and it's an invasive species. You might be familiar with it. There's a host of invasive species in all of our regions that seem prolific and never ending. And spotted knapweed is one that takes over many ecosystems up here. It's a little plant that's got a little pinkish purple flower on it. And it's from Asia and Europe, and it's not suited for over here. And so when it got over here, it has an allelopathic relationship with everything else around it. So its roots, they emit a weak toxin into the soils around it, which kills off all of the plants around it and makes it so that only this plant can survive. It's prolific, it's a big cedar, and it's one of those invasive plants that's probably never going to leave North America again. You're always going to see it because controlling it's just too difficult. And so it's kind of one of those struggles that it's always going to be here. And yet Dave Warner's this professor, everywhere he goes, he's walking or biking, and he picks this plant every time he sees it. He shakes the roots and he throws it onto the curb or onto the side of the drive. And Dave was talking with Tim, and Tim looked at Dave and he said, "Dave, why are you picking this plant? You know, it's not, you're not going to make any difference, by doing that. What hope do you have that this is going to do anything?" And Dave Warners looked at Tim and he said, I don't think it's a matter of hope so much as a matter of faithfulness. And I love that answer and I love that idea because there are problems in this world that individually we can't address. We won't ever get quite on top of them. And that's not necessarily promised to us either. But what is asked of us is faithfulness, that we do our best and that we know to care for creation because God loves creation and what he's asking us to do. And in that effort, that does bring me hope. So in a way, faithfulness is the key for me here with why we can care for creation, why it matters that our little native plant gardens are important and they can make a difference. God is asking us to care for his creation, and we might not be able to do everything, but we can do something. These photos here, this is the photo on the left here is a garden that we planted at a school. And it's a native plant garden, but when everybody leaves in the summer, nobody's there to take care of it. And so it was taken over by spotted knapweed. You can see all the spotted knapweed in the back of the truck here. And then the photo on the right is the work that was done in about an hour of pulling a couple 100 pounds of spotted knapweed. Doing our small parts. And if we go back there today, I'm sure there's a bunch of knapweed back in there. But that's faithfulness, I think, in action. And so along those lines, what are some motivating factors for engaging you guys in this native plant gardening? And as I just mentioned, it can be an expression of faithfulness for many houses of worship and caring for creation. When we look back in Genesis, Genesis is just full of stories and imagery and meaning around caring for the earth. And so, you know, in Genesis right away, Genesis 1:26, God says mankind was created in our image, in our likeness, to rule over the earth, to rule over the birds and the fish and the beasts on the land. So right off the bat, we're showing the creation story. And in each verse, it ends with, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And then Genesis chapter 1 ends with, and I've created you in my image, in my likeness, to rule over these things. And then a little bit later on in Genesis chapter 2:15, we see that God gives the command to Adam to keep and to till, to steward, really is how we interpret that today, the earth. And so native plant gardening is doing just that. Native plant gardening can be a great tool for congregational engagement. So we're all looking for ways to provide meaningful experiences for the members of our houses. And native plant gardens are a great way to do that because they fall in line with the biblical mandate to care for earth. It also can be an expression of service to our community. So these gardens, you know, wilderness, nature is not confined to one place or another, but it all kind of flows together, and it can make our communities beautiful, which increases civic pride and the way that people feel about where they live. And it can also be a billboard sort of effect to your house of worship to say, here, this is demonstrating our values. If you've been hurt by the church, if you felt like an outsider for things that you've cared about or felt and have maybe distanced yourself from it, maybe it's a way to show people like, hey, this is a place that cares. This is a place that maybe thinks a way that might be attractive to me. So I really like that way, that motivating factor as well. There are financial benefits in urban areas, especially for catchments of storm runoff, stormwater. If you're creating rain gardens or bioswales or ways to harness some of that runoff, there can be financial benefits to you. They're great ways to bring into line memorials or sacred places. I have nothing against begonias and tulips and petunias and all these, you know, beautiful annual plants that we have. But in bringing into line our mandate to care for the earth, we can do a lot with native plants, and they can come right into line with our memorials or our sacred space. And then there's, of course, all kinds of other reasons or motivating factors why a house might choose to have a native plant garden. And then why particularly native plants? Well, Native plants are specifically adapted to the regions where they're found. Okay, a native plant is a plant that it has existed in a place naturally over a millennia. So it's well adapted to that area, the region, the climate, the soils. We call them ecotypes. So it gets even more specific than that. We have big blue stem up here in Michigan, and you also have big blue stem in Texas. But if you were to take the seeds of big blue stem that grow in Texas and bring them up to Michigan, that plant would not do as well in Michigan as it's doing in Texas because our winters are different, our soils are different, our climates are different. And so native plants and native seeds, these ecotypes, are really well adapted for where they're at. And not only that, but they fit in with the wildlife that are in these areas as well, who have special adaptations or needs from those plants for their food source or for their habitat or for their resources. Native plants help improve water quality. They're suited for our areas, and so their roots are well adapted to our areas. They slow runoff. They increase infiltration. They help recharge groundwater in our water tables. They're really important for those reasons. They're incredibly important for pollinators, right? So nectar and pollen are food sources for our birds, or for our bumblebees and our butterflies and our flies and our other insects. um, they contribute $500 billion to the world's economy every year, just pollinators. $500 billion. 1/3 of the food that reaches our table is dependent upon a pollinator. And we also know that pollinators can travel 1/2 mile up to 2 miles of foraging circumference to be able to find nectar sources and find pollen to bring back to their larvae, to their young, and to their nests. They support wildlife, so all of this is part of the food chain, right? So we have producers like plants that are growing, and then we have these pollinators, these first order consumers that will come and visit the plants, and then those provide the food source for the consumers further on down. So one of the things I like to say with our students is, if you really care about bears, or if you really love, pick your favorite animal, fox, a coyote, a wolf, whatever, you have to care about the plants that are in our area because they're the things sustaining the habitat that makes it possible for us to have those charismatic critters. They're beautiful. Contrary to what a lot of people believe about native plants, that photo right there is at a church in Traverse City, Michigan, and those are beautiful plants. You don't just have to go to the garden center and buy annuals every year. They also come back year after year, unlike your annual plants that you have to keep going out and buying. So it's good for your finances as well. It's an upfront cost, but there's beauty over time and savings over time. And then they're lower maintenance generally because they're adapted to these climates and these environments. Once they're established, there's not a lot of watering that needs to be done. You're not going to kill the whole garden if you leave for the week and come back. You don't need to prune them back as much. They are left to be able to do their own thing, and they look beautiful doing it. So native plants are amazing. So what can a native plant garden be then for you guys? You can create, in your groups, what is your vision that you're trying to accomplish at your church or your house of worship? And if you want a pollinator garden, you can maximize that with beauty and tons of blooms and have this really vibrant and gorgeous garden out front. But you can also manage stormwater and runoff with rain gardens and bioswales. So this image down here, this is a church about 20 minutes from a Sable Institute. They were having, you can see that rooftop drips all the way right down to the edge there, and they were getting a bunch of moisture in the basement. And so what we did was we went in and we pulled all the rock away and we created a gradient and relined it, and we pulled so now the drip edge drains everything away from the church, and it helped to solve moisture problems in the basement. You can create natural playscapes and educational gardens. So we've got kids down here in the right side who are going out and collecting seed as a group, and they're going to grow plants from that seed that they collected. This garden up here has nameplates on it so that the congregation can go out, and if they like a particular variety of plant, they can know what it is and know how it benefits pollinators and wildlife and when it blooms. There's really cool educational pieces that can be created around this. And then, like we said earlier, there's reflection, prayer, memorial gardens that you could create, community gathering spaces. Really, you can use these native plants to accent pretty much anything at your church. So the planning process. So what would this look like then to create a native plant garden at your church? So these are the steps we're going to go in over more detail over the coming slides, but it's going to start by you forming a team and identifying your vision. So who or what is this garden for? What do you want to use it for? I see Jerry Koning here tonight, and I know he does a lot with his congregation working outside, and I can imagine that there's a whole lot of ideas that are swirling around how can I engage my Sunday school group with it? How can I engage intergenerational teams with it at my church so that the kids are also sharing it with the adults, going out collecting seed, doing things where maybe you're even collecting plants to give away to the community. There's an important first step is who's your team and what is the vision? What do you want out of this? You need to communicate your vision to the appropriate leadership and committees, right? At your church, we've all got these pathways, the executive committee, the church council, making sure that facilities is on board with it. Don't do too much work before you've let people know what you want to do, and get people on board before they feel like they're blindsided, and make sure you get the appropriate approvals. Head out and identify your project location. So where is it that you want to create your garden? What makes sense? And then make sure you're getting approval from facilities and council on what you're planning to do. And then after that, you can start to create your project timeline. So when are you going to design? How long is it going to take you to prep the site appropriately? How long is it going to take to install? Or when would you like to install? And then you can kind of work backwards on, well, then we need to be prepping at this point, designing at this point, and talking about your outreach and your educational components that are going to go along with it. It's important that you inform and involve your congregation along the way. So writing in the newsletter, in the little blurbs on Sunday and in the email blasts that you've got this team and this is what you're trying to do, and try to gain some support from others at the church. And then we're going to talk about organizing your garden and prepping your install days and your outreach events and what it looks like to monitor and maintain your space. So the process of site selection. This is a really important one that happens right at the beginning, but understanding the historical and potential future use of the sites that you're looking at maybe converting to a garden. This church here, Presbyterian of Traverse City, our initial meetings, we walked the grounds, we looked at, areas that were undisturbed, areas that were already disturbed, and the major focal point of where they wanted to put their garden after some consideration, we realized that was the only green space on property that the kids could play soccer in, that the kids could play football in, that they could run around in, that was flat enough. And so that was something that made us pivot and think, okay, maybe let's go to a different spot so that, other uses of this congregation can be met in this area. Similarly, churches, everybody at churches has ideas for what they want that church to look like and what they want to do. And there might be somebody who's got an idea for the future that they've been holding on to with a certain site. And so it's nice to be able to let people have a voice and say where they'd like gardens, and to ask around to say, is there anybody who's thinking of other uses for this in the future before you start breaking ground on a site? Of course, you've got to determine the site characteristics once you narrow it down. What is the sun like? What's the soil like? What's the moisture like in the soil? To make sure that's going to inform your plant selection, right? Access to a water source is really important. So while these are native plants, early on, they're going to need some pampering and they're going to need watering until they establish themselves. And usually that's about the first year. So I like to treat them real well, give them water. And if you have a water source, that makes it a lot easier. If you don't, it doesn't mean you can't have a native plant garden. It just means you're going to alter the season that you plant in. So you might want to wait till fall when the cooler temperatures have arrived and there's a little bit more moisture around and things don't dry up quite so quickly. does the safety of the site line up with your vision for you? So again, if you're going to have this near a road, but you want the kids to go out there and enjoy it, well, how busy is that road? Is that going to create safety concerns for you? So those are always things to keep in mind. And then does visibility line up with your vision? Um, if it's hidden in the back of your church, that's absolutely fine. But if you're also wanting to use that site as a way to show people what you guys are up to and draw people in, you might want to consider also having something out front that's a little bit more visible. But again, this just has to line up with your vision. Once you've chosen your site, you know where it's going to be, then you can start thinking about the design. And of course, there's a ton to go with here. So we'll cover things a little bit briefly, but here is a garden design for a church here in Michigan. And you can see there's a lot that can go into it. There's a lot of different plants, and your plant selection is dependent on your site characteristics. Is it a sunny site? Is it a shady site? Are there windows in front of where we're putting these plants? Is that going to obscure the vision? So think about your plant selection and the site characteristics. And then the type of garden that you're creating is also going to inform your plant selection. Is it a rain garden? Is it going to be a shade garden? Is it a memorial garden? Do you want it to be a pollinator garden with a bunch of really fancy blooms, or are you more looking for just diversified habitat? All that stuff informs your ending plant list, but you first start with where are you going to put it? What type of garden are you going for? And then you can start to narrow down the appropriate plants for that site. Generally, when we garden, you're going to plant from short to tall in the back, short up front, tall in the back, so that you're not obscuring the views and you get and you don't have plants falling over walkways or into driveways and creating those sort of distractions. We like to plant with a bouquet effect. And so what that means is we like to plant plants in clumps of like 5 to 7 or 8 of the same variety. When you plant these big gardens, it's really easy for a flower to bloom and for nobody to see it if it's by itself, because you have so many other aspects going on in the garden. So these plants will all come into bloom of the same variety at the same time. So if you want to see your columbine blooming, put 10 of them or so right next to each other, and then put another variety right next to that and another variety right next to that, and then maybe come back with some more columbine. But clump planting helps to create some visual appeal. You need to consider your spacing, and that's going to inform your quantities. So this garden right here is a 2,000 square foot garden, or just about that. And if we were planting, a general rule of thumb is about to plant each of these plants about every square foot. So that means that we'd have about 2,000 plants that we'd install there. So you obviously can change that up. You can plant them tighter together and leave more negative space in between, or you can just plant tighter together and you'll get these tighter clusters. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're thinking about how many plants is this garden going to take, we generally say about 1 plant every square foot. Staggering your blooms is really important for like visual appeal and effect, and also to support, like maximally support our pollinators. So staggering blooms means we have plants that bloom in early spring, and then in late spring, and then in summer, and then in early fall, and then in late fall. In our garden designs, we like to make sure that we've got plants that are blooming at each of those times, so that as visitors come in, they don't just see green or they don't just see brown. They'll see something in bloom at each time of the year. It's also a really nice way to support our pollinators, because they're visiting these gardens for the nectar, for the pollen. And if there's everything in bloom in June, then that means that there's nothing blooming in August or September. So aggressive plants. There are some plants that are native that can be aggressive. I'm sure everybody thinks about goldenrod when they think about aggressive plants. Canada goldenrod is that one that grows in the ditches a lot. There's a ton of goldenrods out there that don't act like that, that are very beautiful and very showy. So I always like to tell people goldenrod gets a bad name, but it is much bigger and much more beautiful than that one plant that you see in the ditches all the time. But goldenrods at times can be aggressive. They're rhizotomous, so they don't just depend upon their seeds, they actually branch out from their roots. So as you're researching the native plants that you might want to pick, if they're talking about being aggressive, if they're talking about spreading by rhizomes, that's a key that they might be a little more aggressive, which is okay. I don't shy away from it because it helps to establish a garden quickly. But just know if you've got other plants that you're spending money on, they might get gobbled up if you don't create some sort of barrier or boundary in between them. And then with rain gardens, again, you got to consider wetness too. So not only the sun conditions, but you are going to create areas where you're going to have wet dependent plants and then dry dependent plants. I show this because in the process of creating a map or a design for your garden, everything for me starts with graph paper. So and then eventually maybe I'll convert it over to some kind of graphic like that. But the really simple way to do it is just to go out there, buy yourself a notepad and graph paper, and then every square is a square foot, or you can scale it as you like to. And then create your designs from there for what you want it to look like. Once you've got your design down, then you can start thinking about preparing your planting site. So it's obviously very important to understand and locate your utilities. So where are the water lines? Where are the gas lines? Where are the electrical lines? Generally, all of this stuff is much deeper than you're ever going to have to agitate the soil to put in your garden, but it's still really nice to know. And then speak with your facilities people and have them do the best job they can at understanding where the electrical is at. And then the other thing that we often not sometimes run into is our in-ground sprinkler systems, right? So every now and then you're digging a hole and you realize, oh, that's right where they put the sprinkler line, and then you've got some work to do to repair that. But locating utilities is important before you do anything. Then the pre-existing conditions influence your timeline. So when you're going to be able to install is dependent upon the method at which you prepare your garden. And there's a couple different ways to do that we'll talk about. But if you're converting, are you going to convert an existing garden? Some people will take gardens that they already have that are full of annuals. They'll pull those out and they'll just want to convert it over to native plants. In other instances, you're starting from scratch and maybe you're removing turf. And so I've got some slides to help us think about the planning in each of those scenarios here. So if you're converting an existing garden, like this garden here at Presbyterian Church in Traverse City, they had this site that was full of juniper. And the way to get rid of that was to dig it out. So that set their timeline. That's a lot of stuff that they had to dig out of there. And it took quite a bit of time, but you can see on the bottom, they eventually did get it out and they were able to plant it. Along the way, you ask yourself, is there anything here that we want to keep? Can we give plants away to congregational members as they're leaving as a way to both raise awareness for the native plant garden and also give people plants that they love? And then you need to consider too, is the site taken over by anything aggressive, invasive, or are there any hardy plants there that need to be managed that are going to be difficult to remove? Or if you're going to try using herbicide to get rid of them, that they'd be herbicide resistant to. So I think of things like myrtle, which a lot of people have as ground cover and escapes out and takes over other areas. Really hard to get rid of without digging it out or smothering it in some way. So you've got to have a plan in play for dealing with those aggressive plants or those hardy plants. And then this process can be labor intensive. So as you're thinking about what's the path for moving forward, how do we prep this site? What do we want to manage? Just look at your crew and know what's possible and try not to bite off too much. So if you are going to convert a blank slate site, so we think about turf or something similar to that, one way you can do it is you can just remove the turf and then you can almost plant immediately. And so you can see in these pictures here, we start with a site, we go out with a sod cutter. You don't always have to, if the site's small enough, you can use a shovel, that's fine to get under a sod. This is about 1,600 square feet. And so we go get a sod cutter for it. And it's a labor of love. You're out there rolling sod, removing it and getting it out. But this is, in some instances, the only option. So if you're in sensitive habitat near water, you can't use herbicides. And so a real simple way to do that organically is just to go in and get rid of it all. The benefits are you can plant immediately. So as soon as you're done getting that turf out, you can plant it, you can mulch it, and you're ready to go. But it is a lot of work. It's back-breaking work. Another option is using herbicide like glyphosate, like Roundup, something like that. You can see this site here, we had just a flat, pretty much flat turf surface. We went in, we delineate the border where we want it to be to match up with our design. And then in this bottom one, you can see the dead grass is all where the herbicide has been laid. And then you can go right in after that, 3 days after your final application of that herbicide, and you can plant right into the turf. So you're not, the benefits of this for keeping weeds down is you've killed off the grass, and the grass is now acting as a mulch or a barrier or a block, preventing any of the seed source that's built up in the soil from coming up. And so you plant right into that turf, and then you mulch that, and you've got a relatively weed-free garden right off the bat. This is good for you if you've got a large site and removing the turf manually is just a little too difficult. And your planting timeline is short because the process is very quick. You mow once the plants start to, or once the grass starts to get its energy back and grow, you hit it with an herbicide. And then you can reapply if you see that some of the grass hasn't been killed after about 10 days. And then 3 days after that, after your final application, you're safe to go ahead and plant. It's really effective. It's quick. You do have to be aware of health and safety concerns. If people have chemical sensitivities, this isn't maybe a good option for you. Every church has a little bit different policies on this, but many places you have to inform your congregation at least 2 days in advance of the note or the intent to apply herbicide so that sensitive people can be aware of that and they don't enter those sites. And then use with caution around water. So if you've got open water near where you're doing this, glyphosate is not something you want to get in your waterways. And so you might want to consider an alternative for that. Another option for prepping a site is smothering. So this is just the process of going out there. You're going to mow down your site nice and low, and then you're going to lay cardboard or newspaper down, and then you'll put mulch on top of that. And after 2 to 3 months, that site will be ready to plant, and you can just plant right into the mulch. It creates a weed barrier with the cardboard there from things coming up through it. And it's a really effective method. The only reason we don't do this all the time is because it does take a little bit of time. You've got about a 3-month period where you need to let this stuff weather and start to break down and decompose before it's safe to go in there and mulch. You do need to make sure too, if any areas where your paper or your cardboard isn't lined up correctly, you'll get weeds that'll pop up in between there from the past. But it's a great tool for creating, not having the use of herbicides and getting really good weed suppression. And then solarization is the final prep piece that I'll talk to you about. This is the process of going out and using the sun's energy and kind of a greenhouse effect to kind of cook the soil essentially and kill off any seeds that might be lingering in that soil and preparing a site so that you can go back in and plant it. So the way that we do this is you identify your site, you lay out some clear plastic, like a painting cloth, like a drop cloth for painting. You make sure it's nice and tight. And I should say prior to doing that, you want to till the site, and then you want to water the site, and then you lay the plastic down. And once you've got that moisture in that dirt underneath and you got the sun's rays beating down on it, it heats up 160, 170 degrees, and it just kind of makes the soil intolerable for those seeds and for those weeds. And after about 3 months, then your site is clear and you can go ahead and plant in it. I really like this method. The things I don't like about this method is you're using a large sheet of plastic, and that plastic is pretty much useless afterwards. And so it's going to the dump, or it's going somewhere, or it's shedding microplastics. So if I have the option between this and smothering, I'd rather go with smothering, where stuff just mulches and composts right into the soil and provides that weed barrier over using this giant sheet of plastic. It's also kind of a visibility sore. So you can see this is a church that has a co-op with a preschool attached to it, and it's on a busy street here in Traverse City. And for 3 months, they had this big tarp placed out right on this busy road here. It draws some, curiosity, and people in Traverse are generally um, they're pretty environmentally conscious, so they probably know what's going on, but it does create a little bit of an eyesore. So once you finally got your preparation done, whichever method you're choosing to do, then it's time to install your garden. The things to know is who's going to show up for this, how many people are you going to have, and can you be prepared for them? Think about what equipment you're going to need. When we plant, we're planting native plants that are coming in these plug flats down here. So there's about 38 plants per tray, and they're little seedlings. So they're generally about a year to a year and a half old. They've got established roots, and they're about 2 inches in diameter by 5 inches deep. And so you can plant those with a regular trowel or a shovel or anything like that, but they make these really nice attachments to your drill called a bulb auger. And with a bulb auger, it drills and drills and drills, and you can drill 1,000 holes for your plants in probably 20 minutes if you wanted to. It's a really quick process. It works really, really well. So in all of our programs, we use bulb augers to plant all of our plants, but it's not the only way to do it. And then you're going to want to communicate the process to everybody. So we like to have, when we show up at a site to help a house of worship do a planting, we like to have the site prepped, or we know that the site is prepped, and then we'll get there a little early and we'll actually do a demonstration planting for everybody. So when they come in, they know what their spot should look like. So down here, we've got a bunch of holes drilled up this runway here, but in the front, we've got it planted and we have it mulched so people know how to plant, they know the spacing, they have a visual identification or reference point for it, and then they can go do like we did, and it makes it a lot simpler. You should, depending on the size of your garden too, be thinking about a method or a way for staging your plants and marking their location. So on a big garden like this, 2,000 square feet, we got 26 different species, and we have 2,000 plants that we're going to put in. We need a lot of people to install a garden of this size, but that also can get really confusing very quickly. So what we've done is we've got these mixes here that have different types of plants in that mix, and then that is associated with a spot in the garden. We'll go out and we'll use marking paint to delineate those areas, and then we put, it's hard to see here, but there's little flags, and those little flags will reference the plant mixture that goes in that area. And then we'll stage the plants that are part of that mixture right there. So it's really quick and simple to say to everybody, all right, in this area, this is the partial mix. These are your plants. You plant them in clumps. They all go in here. Ask me if you have any questions, and they can get right to work planting and installing, and they don't have to be guessing what goes in that area. At other times, we have some garden designs where people just want to put a certain variety in a certain spot. They all want June grass right on the corner, and then they want it lined with black-eyed Susans. So in that area, it's really simple. We still go out and delineate where we're putting things, but then we flag that with the plant variety, and then we have that plant variety right there, and people can put it in. It's important to remember that all of these people who are helping you are volunteering for you, so keep them happy with food and drink. Don't forget about that. And then it's also with volunteers and with employees and anything, it's nice to set timeframes. What is the start point? What is the stop point? Especially when a lot of our garden installs are in the fall, it overlaps with football season, and people want to know, am I going to be done by the time the game starts, or what kind of commitment am I looking at here? Those hardy souls that if you don't get it done in time want to stick around, that's great. But also, it's nice to let people know, hey, your commitment's up. Thanks for coming in. Enjoy the game. There is maintenance and upkeep. So after you've installed your site, you do have to have a plan for maintaining it. Otherwise, it can fall into disrepair pretty quickly. So make sure you're developing a plan for people to understand what it's going to look like to maintain this garden. Consider having a dedicated volunteer crew. to adopt the garden or sections. If it's a big garden, maybe you have different groups. Maybe it's the choir groups got this section. Maybe it's the Knights of Columbus have this section. Maybe it's facilities who does a different section, but make sure that they understand what their role is, and how they're supposed to care for it. For your facilities people, or for the lead group who's kind of spearheading the operation, you do have to water the first year. These native plants, like when we say they're lower maintenance, they definitely are. Once they're established, they're not going to die. You're going to be able to leave and let nature do its thing, but they're going to be a lot happier if you care for them, right? If you nurture them in some way. And that means watering at least initially that first year. And then after that, I always tell houses of worship to, if you've got droughty times or abnormal weather and it's particularly dry, put a sprinkler on them and make them happy, and they'll reward you with their blooms. Stressed plants, they might not die, but they also might not flower if they're really stressed. Weeding is important too. This garden right here, you can see it's so dense, which is what we hope happens over time. And that does a great job of suppressing weeds. But until it gets to that point, if you don't have somebody out there early on in the spring to get rid of those first weeds that pop up, and then a little bit later in the summer to at least do a little bit of tidying and get some of those weeds out of there, the weeds can create a problem and block open space and start to take over. But a lot of those weeds are annuals. So if you get them right away in the spring, they're not going to drop any seed, and they're not going to sprout and create more problems. And so that's why we tell everybody that first weed is really important. And then a follow-up weed middle through the year is also can be really helpful. Seasonal upkeep, people, especially gardeners, they want to know, well, what do we do with this in the fall? What do we do with this in the winter? And my short answer to that is nothing. You don't have to do anything to it. But that's not generally the answer they're looking for, because the garden looks raggedy over the winter, right? It's died back. You've got these standing heads of flowers and seeds that are there. It's all gray or tan or golden, which to me is beautiful, but to people who want to see a tidy, upkept garden, it looks in a little bit of disrepair. So you need to find a happy medium with your group that says, what is everybody on board with on the function of this garden over the winter? Do we want to leave it natural so that birds can come in and eat seed from it, like they're designed to do, like they're hoping to do, like native plants provide food for them to do? Do you want to leave it unkept so that pollinators can hibernate in the stems of those plants? This is coming back to God's grand design for everything. Just because it's dead, it's still providing a function as a habitat, and that can be seen as a really beautiful thing. So I try to educate congregations on the importance of the role that these plants play throughout the winter. But if your congregation feels otherwise, and if there's too many people who don't quite see eye to eye with that, it's okay to cut it back. You can tidy it up. At bare minimum, you've got these beautiful flowers and nectar sources for the pollinators throughout the growing season. And then during the winter, they're just not able to do their full, complete job of also providing habitat and food source for the critters over the winter. Outreach and education. So thinking about how you're going to engage your community, how you're going to engage your congregation in your efforts. It's almost like if you're not communicating, if it doesn't show up on Instagram, if it doesn't show up on Facebook, it's like it never happened, right? So it's important to let people know what you're up to. Get them engaged with it. Help, write letters for your newsletter or your email blasts, show them photos, but then you can also go above and beyond that. You can organize events that can engage your congregation or your community. So what types of things could you do? Well, there's a zillion things you can do with seed collection. So you can get out there and you can collect seeds in the fall, and you can give those seeds away to congregants, or you can give them away to the community, or you can drop them off at the local seed library at the conservation district. Everybody, there are people who really care about these native plants and would love to have those seeds. You can also do little workshops on how to grow native plants by putting them in milk containers and overwintering them outside. And then in the spring, those seeds that you've put in those milk containers sprout up, and now you've got all these native plants that you could add to your garden, that you could give away to your congregation. There's just so many things you can do there. This photo down here is exactly that. This group was growing plants, and we did just a community giveaway day. And so we had people come on out and they could just take a variety of native plants home with them. These photos over here are from green fairs that congregations put together to celebrate the native plant garden, to bring the community in and to engage them in the work that they're doing and the importance of native plants. You could start creation care teams. You can do creation care focuses for different months. There's a whole host of them, but be thinking the whole time, how can we tell people about what we're doing? How can we have some sort of outreach from this effort?